Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Simon. Like you mentioned, I'm the CRO at Fyber. We're an app monetization platform. We live and die in the app world. We have a very heavy emphasis on gaming in particular. But by way of background, I actually come from the programmatic space. I've only been in the in-app space at Fyber for about 6 months. Prior to that, I spent the last 15 years working in programmatic. And having come to this world where programmatic is still very much new and a sort of a new thing that's being tested out, I thought it would be worthwhile to share a bunch of the learnings that I've gained over the years from when web publishers made the transition to ad network driven monetization and into this notion of exchange bidded based marketplaces. And so I figured I'd go through some data that I've already seen that we're using to help our customers make smarter choices about how they are monetizing in the land of this new programmatic opportunity. So really quick about Fyber. We're a global company. We're publicly traded on the Frankfurt Exchange. So our corporate headquarters are in Berlin, but we've got offices all over the place. We're 250 employees. We're 50% R&D and product, 100% app focused. And you know, it's one of the nice things about being a company in this space is that because we're public, you can see where we are. You can understand, there are certain standards that we have to adhere to around transparency and around how we behave that hopefully gives a lot of our customers some confidence in the kind of company that we are. Having spent the last 15 years in and out of public companies and private companies, I can tell you when you have to file things in a public report, there's just a certain amount of transparency you're willing to provide. So pretty helpful in the context of the app space, which is still very a nascent area. Okay, before we talk about how the mechanics of this work, I wanted to share with you guys some research that I've done using AppsFlyer and eMarketer data about how big is programmatic in the in-app space. It's a question that I'm asked all the time. And in the undertone of that question is, why do I care about this, right? I'm making money, I'm getting paid. Like, do I really have to sort out this programmatic thing? The in-app global ad spend market for just in-app, almost all of which is app install based, is a $76 billion market that's growing to almost $120 billion by 2022. So think about it. It's a market that's growing at about 50% in a global programmatic market where growth is actually slowing down. So if you look at the total global programmatic market of about 200 billion, that growth rate is going to go from 35% to 20% over the next 3 years. The in-app space is expecting 50% growth in programmatic. And so, I'm sorry, the global ad spend in-app. In particular, programmatic today is $47 billion of that market. So a huge percentage of the total amount of money that's spent in-app is spent programmatically. Now, hopefully these numbers make it clear to you that this is an area that if you can unpack the value in this supply chain of programmatic, there's tremendous upside to be unlocked. Okay, so this is the market itself. There's an analogy I'm a big fan of using for how we all enter the programmatic market as sellers. In our minds, as publishers, we look at our waterfall and we say, okay, I have these 10 partners with these 10 tiers and their fill rate is X and their eCPM is Y. And so this is a very organized thing. In other words, we think what we put out into the market to the advertisers who want to buy our supply looks like a well-organized Whole Foods. Where you want avocados, you go to the avocado stack. You want a watermelon, you go to the watermelon. You know exactly what to get and how to get it. In reality, when we publish our available inventory into the marketplace for buyers to buy, it looks more like this, where there's no rhyme or reason for how things are priced, why they're able to win, why you're able to get certain inventory at a certain price. It's chaos, and it's incredibly hard for the buy side to figure out how to navigate this chaos. If you think about it from the perspective of a UA marketer, or any marketer for that matter, buying ad inventory is a part of the process of selling something, of driving revenue. So what you're looking for is consistent access to users at consistent prices that make it easy for you to forecast how much revenue you're going to make. When we sell inventory programmatically today with the current construct, we're making it incredibly hard for buyers to understand how to access supply at each of the price points that work for them in a consistent and reliable fashion. So I'll walk you through why that happens, and then I'll give you some data examples of the kinds of things that you guys as app developers and sellers of media, of ad space, should be thinking about when you're listing your inventory. This is a very, very simple version of what we call a supply path. From the time that an advertiser decides to input his budget to the time that the app publisher gets paid, this is the programmatic supply chain. You put on a little opt-out notice there. Oftentimes your vendor will do this for you. Then the budget gets put into a programmatic DSP, a bidder. It points bids to an SSP like Fyber. Fyber then renders the ad via the mediation platform. In this case, I've used MoPub, and then the ad shows up on the app inside of the app. Very, very simple supply path. If you were to take a look at how a network would work, imagine eliminating these two steps and just having this be one section where a bidder and the SSP are conjoined as one. And there's no transparency into who takes what rate or whatever. You throw an ad dollar into a black box and the app publisher gets paid on the other end, and you're good to go. Very effective, hard to understand, not very transparent. In reality, most app developers, in fact, every single app developer I've ever talked to, works with multiple partners. And so rather than listing your inventory in one place, you list it in multiple places. And those places go out and source demand oftentimes from the exact same place. So to use real world partners here, imagine that you're an app that uses MoPub for mediation. You have AppLovin in your waterfall, you have Fyber in your waterfall, you have IronSource in your waterfall. All three of us are going to kick off an auction where we make that impression available to a third-party bidder, like a Liftoff or a Moloko or a Cross Install. And the result is Moloko or Liftoff and Cross Install will see the exact same impression more than once, oftentimes at different prices. If you extrapolate this out to a real-world example, this is a large hyper-casual publisher that we work with. We mapped every supply path they have. This is actually a relatively simple version of a real-world example of how a publisher would be monetizing. Now, these all aren't being called at the same time, as this graphic makes it look. They're all being called simultaneously based on where those partners are in the waterfall. But that doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the bidder still sees sometimes 30 or 40 different opportunities with different prices to try and bid on an impression. And so the result is a few things. First, some DSPs don't know where to bid. Do you bid at the top? Do you bid at the bottom? How much of the performance is reliant on the SDK partner that you're bidding into versus the inventory itself? All sorts of unknowns arise when you create this scenario. And by the way, this is a relatively simple one. I can point to examples where I've seen app developers who have 500 or 600 simultaneously available paths to a single impression. And if you think about your own waterfall, think about every partner at every price point as a supply path, and then add them all up, and you oftentimes will have at least 100. And like I said, we've seen up to 500 or 600 of them. The other big problem is that really savvy bidders will start to figure out which paths give you a better ability to win when all things are equal otherwise. So for example, in this scenario, I have a $5 bid that I'm submitting through a Pubmatic path. It could be a Smoto path. It could be an IronSource path. Doesn't matter. A $5 path. I also have a $2 path, but for whatever reason, my ability to win is actually better at the $2 price than it is at the $5 price. There are a whole bunch of reasons for this. Sometimes it has to do with the technical connection between an SSP and the mediation platform. How good is the SSP that you're bidding into at actually delivering a rewarded video ad unit? What are their survival rates? Well, in a lot of cases, a $5 bid that you actually win will never serve the ad, so it's not effectively a served ad because they couldn't render it. Other times you'll see instances where a partner will have a $5 bid, but they're sitting at a $1 price tier. And so the $5 bid can't win because it never actually makes it to the publisher's mediation solution because you've set that publisher, that SSP at a $1 bid. So all sorts of examples where lower bids will actually beat higher bids, even though what you really want is to create the competition and give the market access to the supply as broadly as possible. And in this particular scenario, I obviously chose one where Fyber looked the best because, you know, why would I choose one where we look bad? But there are lots of examples where Fyber has a higher win rate at the same price tier than other SSPs. Full transparency, there are examples where Fyber has a lower win rate. But again, not going to put that in my deck. I'll let a competitor do that instead. So let me give you some data of what happens independent of, you know, you stick Fyber in your mediation platform at a $3 price. What happens behind the scenes? What's happening on the other end with me and my DSP partners that are bidding into us? Okay, hyper casual publisher, very, very large. This is a 7-day snapshot of the number of bids we got at each price point. Now, this publisher had slotted us at a $1.20 tier for banner inventory. So no matter what the bid I got back was, I was paying this publisher $1.20. What you'll see here on the left, on this y-axis, is that my price is $1.20. A little over 2 million of the bids that I received came back in that price range, between $1 and $1.49. Pretty good, right? This is that the demand that I'm sourcing aligns pretty closely to the price I'm paying the publisher. That's good. Independent of that, you see a whole bunch of other examples where publishers were receiving bids that were significantly higher than the $1.20 tier that I was paying them at, oftentimes north of $250. But remember, I'm paying the $1.20. This is a static price tier that has been set in the mediation platform at $1.20 for this banner placement for Fyber. So the 7-day revenue the publisher got was a little over $5K. If you look at the potential revenue based on each of these tiers and the bids that I got back, instead of paying the $1.20 that I did pay, if I had paid the real market value, there was another $2,700 worth of revenue potential, a 53% increase on one banner placement, simply by accurately expressing the market demand and the market price for the placement that I'm currently only paying $1.20 for. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll answer some questions afterwards. Here's another example, and this one's even more extreme. This is a $12 static price that we were set in the waterfall for an interstitial placement. Again, a little over $5K. This is a different publisher. This is another hyper casual publisher. Again, same thing. We're in that $12 price range. We're seeing the majority of bids come back at the in that bucket where that's an accurate, you know, roughly close to the margin or the price that we'd be shooting for. But there are still lots of bids that are coming back. What's really well above that price. What's really interesting is we actually saw a whole bunch of bids. We saw 2,000 bids that came in at $1,500. Now, 2,000 bids doesn't sound like a lot, but this represents $6,000 worth of revenue potential where somebody out there was trying so hard to buy this inventory. They looked at the inventory that this publisher was selling and said, give it to me. I'm willing to pay $1,500 for it. And the result is that publisher didn't win very much. They only won about 1,000 impressions. And so what's really interesting here is this buyer probably doesn't want to pay $1,500 forever. But there's somebody out there who knows that the value of this inventory is extremely high, and they want to be able to access this inventory. And so as a seller, what you want to make sure you're doing is not locking this publisher in at a $12 price behind some black box wall in the form of a partner through Fyber, right? That you really want to figure out who these buyers are and why they're willing to pay $1,500, because they might not be willing to pay $1,500 forever, but they might be willing to pay $50. And that's a 5x increase or a 4x increase over what you currently slotted this placement at. Same thing again here. In this case, we had a $4.50 placement, bottom of the waterfall for this interstitial placement. This is another casual gaming publisher. $4,000 in a 7-day period for this particular placement. The interesting thing here is that the majority of bids came back well above that price. This is a classic example of the publisher undervaluing the floor price that their inventory should be traded at. If they had instead been able to show the actual market impression, they would have gained another, sorry, I missed this slide here. Another, I think this one was another $4,000. It was like another 120% increase over the existing inventory, over the existing yield. Same thing. Last point I want to make here. This is a really mid-tier priced RV placement. 7-day revenue was about $1,200. Again, more of the demand came back at significantly higher prices. Now, the interesting thing is this placement, our price in the waterfall is set through an auto CPM floor. So the CPM will move. But what you see is that the number of bids that we're getting back are significantly higher than the price that we've been quoted at. And so again, another 120% potential revenue increase if all you were able to do is accurately capture the bid price, or at least understand who these buyers were. Okay, last couple of takeaways, and I'll wrap up so we can get to Q&A. Programmatic is a real thing in the app space. If we look at what happened from 2008 to 2018 on the web, you'll see that publishers who leaned into programmatic understood the supply chain, demanded transparency from their partners, and didn't just settle for the check, are the ones that are unlocking huge budgets at low operational cost today. If you think about the amount of money that I showed you that's left on the table, think about how your LTV calculation would change if you knew that you were able to actually monetize certain users at the market value rather than an assumed average that's either set statically or dynamically via 24-hour API lag. Last thing I would say, these are the questions I would leave you guys with to be asking of your partners. How much of the demand that you're bringing to me comes from DSPs versus demand that you've sourced from a direct sale? Who are the demand sources that you're integrated with? I want to know who the buyers are that are bringing the campaigns to my app via your platform. And then most importantly, what's the spread between the price I've set with you and the average bids that you're seeing? If you understand those things, you can start to calculate how to move your floors around, how to re-architect your waterfall, and how to capitalize on the opportunity to capture more budget. So I'll pause there. That was fast and furious. Hopefully that made sense, and there are some questions.
Great, thank you, David. Thank you very much. That was great. Very, very, very insightful and full of data. And we've got a couple of questions in the question and answer window there. If anyone else has anything they want to ask, please do drop that in the box at the bottom there. We've got 3 there. I'm going to just start, David. I'll read the questions out loud in case people can't see them, but we've got a few there. Roberto, you've raised your hand. It's probably we aren't going to be able to unmute your mic, so you might want to drop a question into the Q&A box. So so David, we've got first of all a question from Sai there. He says, do you provide the bid price versus the number of bids graphs to ad sellers?
Yeah, so this data that I showed here, I would tell you who the publishers are, but I didn't have a chance to share all of this data with the pubs. The short answer is yes, that one of the critical things that Fyber's focused on is helping show the difference between prices that you've asked to be paid and what the market is willing to pay. And so this data here is available to Fyber customers right now. And I'll be honest with you, this is not unique. It's not some custom report we've built. Every platform on the planet has access to this data. And so regardless of who you're working with, ask for this information. If they aren't willing to share it, that should tell you a lot. Because to the second question, I think there was another question about it. What happens to the spread when I get paid when I'm paying $1.20 and I'm getting a $100 bid? What happens? Well, the first thing I'll point out is that a $100 bid doesn't necessarily mean $100 paid, right? That we use primarily second price auction. So $100 bid will bid reduce, and so if they're the only bid in there, then there's a big drop in that bid to the clear price. But even when we're seeing clear prices like we saw here. Yeah, the average network will keep some of that budget. And what's interesting is that and a lot of networks are not willing to expose this data because the amount of inventory, the amount of demand they source that comes directly from their own campaigns versus the demand that is sourced from generally available sources that I tap into as well. The amount of money that's being sent through DSPs is growing up like crazy. And so this problem is getting worse, not better. And the only way to stop it is for publishers to try and claim that information back.
David, that's great. We've got a bunch of questions now. I'm going to skip in here. One of our anonymous questioners has asked you if the COVID-19 situation, how do you see it impacting ad monetization?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm sure this is being asked in every session. What I can tell you is if you live in the in-app space where primarily you're in gaming in particular, gaming's in a wonderfully advantageous spot relative to brands. I'll give you guys an example though. One of the biggest brand buyers that I had buying us in Q1 is a restaurant chain called Olive Garden. They're not spending any money right now. And so if you're an app whose 99% of your demand comes from other games, probably very little impact. I know there's a whole bunch of question about like user engagement rates and what happens to disposable income and IAP. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't think anybody does yet. Anybody who says they do needs to pump the brakes and see what happens, because I've been looking at data from China. We have a pretty big presence in China there. Our numbers look pretty strong in China. And so like I'm going to hold off judgment until that becomes an answer.
Great, thank you. Just very quickly want to answer Adam's question about accessing recordings. Yeah, you'll be able to watch this back later. We're recording all the tracks. So if you came in late and missed what David was saying earlier on, there'll be a recording made available later. So David, yeah, we've got a few more questions there. Stefano asks, is it right to assume that header bidding mediation would help solving this mismatch between demand and supply?
Yeah. So this is really interesting. First, I spent a year before this at a consulting firm called Jounce Media. I have no financial involvement with that company, but I would say that they are hands down the best research firm out there for programmatic. Jounce, Jounce, check out their research. This is the kind of thing that what you'll see. Right now, the inefficiency that we have in the in-app space is a result of a linear mediation platform. So the price you set versus the price you're able to access are highly discrepant. When you move to header bidding and you get away from that static set price and you let the market determine, there are still big inefficiencies that can be exploited on the buy side and ways you can exploit it on the sell side. And that's the 2.0 version of this. So if we get together again and we're seeing header bidding installed and it's at scale, I'll give you another presentation on some data around that, because I think it's a great question. But the short answer is like, not yet. Header bidding will help, but it won't solve all of it.
We've got a few minutes left, so if you don't mind taking another couple of questions, David, we've got some more in here. Another anonymous attendee asks, I heard somewhere that Google and Facebook limit the line item calls. Is it true? What are the ideal number of line items for Google, Facebook, and other popular networks?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and the answer varies widely. That's not a helpful answer. So I'll give you what data I have about Facebook and Google and how they tie into this whole thing, because I think it's important. One of the main reasons, let me back up. So Fyber has a mediation platform called Fairbid. We talk a lot about header bidding. The only way to really make this problem get significantly better is to get away from the idea of line items, right? Now, Fairbid was built to do that, but a huge chunk of demand still sits in the hands of the ad networks. So Google, as a demand provider through the AdMob install stuff, they don't bid into any other platform right now. So Google doesn't give you access to their demand via a solid programmatic channel unless you're using AdMob, right? And so Facebook does. Facebook bids through as a private programmatic mediated network into us, into some others. And so you can access Facebook demand programmatically. When you do that, you don't have to worry about line items anymore, right? Because they're bidding at every single impression into a real-time auction, and that auction should reconcile against all of the other demand sources that are also competing. And so the real answer to your question is, the number of line items I want is as few as possible, and only where the partners are providing unique access to demand that I cannot access programmatically. So the top of my waterfall, I would put Google. Then I might put like a Vungle, right, who doesn't do any programmatic bidding. But everybody else, I would say, you're going to compete for my inventory inside of that auction that sits at the top of the fair bid mediation platform. And by the way, lots of people have auctions. It's worth digging into why they're different. There are some differences, but by and large, anybody that can bid, shove them in the auction. Anybody that's big enough without access that you can't access programmatically, stick them in a line item. So for me, I think maybe 3 tops, or I should say 3 partners, not 3 line items. Hopefully that helps.
David, we've actually got probably maybe like a minute or 2 more. We've got 3 questions in there. I should say, if anyone's asked a question or wants to ask a question and wants to do it privately, they can probably find David through the meeting system after this if they want to approach you. But we've got a question here, just calling back to your COVID-19 question. Another anonymous attendee has asked that they're concerned about working with ad networks which have net 45 or net 60 payouts during the COVID-19 situation. What do you suggest?
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to answer this question. We sent out an email to all of our publishers about 2 weeks ago where we offered accelerated payment terms because we know for the app developer community, you know, we don't want people sitting around waiting for cash to pay their developers. We want you guys to continue to release titles. And so we've offered to accelerate payment where we can. We're again unique in that, you know, we're a public company. We have healthy cash reserves. We also have access to capital. What I would say is that you want to be paying a lot of attention to the sequential liability terms. I think there's going to be people at the very top of the ecosystem who will be continue to pay very, very timely, and a lot of people who are going to have a hard time paying because they're not getting paid on time. So that like it's a complicated thing. What I would say also though, and I spent a bunch of time with bankers in the last 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot of liquidity. You know, BNY Mellon is a big bank here in New York. They've got $250 billion in cash that's their cash reserve every day. That's up 100% in the last 3 weeks. They average about 100 billion in cash a day. Everybody sidelined their cash, which means everybody's going to have access to capital. What you want to be doing is getting paid by people who have viable businesses, because those are the people that are going to have access to the credit lines. And so if you have a long tail ad network that represents 6% of your total revenue and you see them spiking, maybe pay attention. If you're talking about an asset that's owned by KKR or BlackRock, or that's a public company or something like that, I wouldn't worry about it. Hopefully that helps.